The wrench slipped from David Reed's oil-stained hands and clattered against the concrete floor. He cursed it under his breath and bent down to retrieve it, feeling the familiar ache in his lower back. The old injury from his service days never really went away. It just waited for moments like these to remind him that he was not as young as he used to be. The vintage propeller plane sat before him like a patient waiting for surgery. David had been restoring aircraft for 3 years now, ever since he left the military. The work kept him busy. It kept his mind from wandering to places he did not want to visit. Tonight, he was replacing the fuel lines on a 1950s model that some collector had dumped on him 6 months ago. The clock on the wall showed midnight. David wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and considered calling it a night. Then he heard something. A scraping sound came from the storage section at the rear of his hangar. Probably a raccoon again. They loved getting into the boxes of old parts he kept back there. He grabbed a flashlight from his workbench and walked toward the storage area. The sound came again. This time it was different, almost like whimpering. David felt his military training kick in, his body tensed, his senses sharpened. Whatever was back there was bigger than a raccoon. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness between the stacked crates and old engine parts. 2 pairs of eyes reflected the light back at him, large eyes, amber-colored. Definitely not a raccoon. David moved closer, and his breath caught in his throat. 2 creatures huddled behind a pile of wooden boxes. They were unlike anything he had seen on Earth. Their bodies were covered in scales. That might have been beautiful once, but now looked dull and damaged. Wings folded against their backs, torn and dirty. The larger one positioned itself in front of the smaller one, trying to shield it from view. Recognition hit David like a punch to the gut. Dreskari. He had seen pictures of them during intelligence briefings. Dragon-like aliens from somewhere near the contested rim. Their world had been in the news a few months back. Something about a war. The larger Dreskari made a low, growling sound. Not aggressive, more like a plea. It spoke in broken galactic common, the trade language used across known space. Please. No report, please. David kept his flashlight lowered now, not wanting to blind them. He could see them better in the dim light. They were young, children maybe. The larger one looked like a teenager in human terms. The smaller one barely moved at all. Easy, David said quietly. I am not going to hurt you. The larger Dreskari did not seem convinced. It kept itself between David and the smaller one. David noticed the smaller one then. Really noticed it. The little dragon was breathing in short, rapid gasps. Its scales looked wrong. Discolored around the shoulder area. David had seen enough field wounds to recognize infection when he saw it. The small one was in bad shape. Your friend is hurt, David said, pointing at the smaller Dreskari. That wound needs medicine. Soon, the larger one looked back at its companion, then at David. Fear and desperation warred in those amber eyes. No doctors, they take us, send us back, send them back. David understood immediately. These were refugees, illegal ones. If he reported them, they would be deported, sent back to whatever hell they had escaped from. He should call the authorities. That was the law. That was his duty as a citizen. The smaller Dreskari made a weak, whimpering sound and slumped further against the crate. The larger one turned, its attention fully to its companion, momentarily forgetting about David. It spoke softly in its own language, something musical and clicking that David could not understand. David made his decision. He set the flashlight down on a crate, pointing it at the ceiling so it gave off general light without blinding anyone. Stay here, I will be back. He walked quickly back to his house, grateful that he lived alone on this property. No one to explain things to. No one to see him gathering medical supplies from his bathroom cabinet. He grabbed antibiotics left over from his last dental procedure, bandages, antiseptic, and clean towels. When he returned to the hangar, the larger Dreskari had pulled the smaller one into its lap. Both watched him approach with frightened eyes. I need to look at that wound, David said, kneeling a few feet away from them. I need to clean it and give medicine. Do you understand? The larger Dreskari hesitated, then spoke. He dies without help. Maybe that infection looks bad. Another long moment of silence. Then the larger one shifted, allowing David to move closer. The smaller Dreskari was barely conscious now. David carefully examined the wound on its shoulder. Deep cut, several days old, badly infected. He had seen worse during the war, but not by much. He worked quickly, cleaning the wound as gently as he could. The small dragon whimpered but did not fight. The larger one held it steady, whispering constantly in their language. David applied antiseptic, then carefully inserted a diluted dose of antibiotics directly into the tissue around the infection. "This will help," David said. "But he needs rest. And food. When did you two last eat?" The larger Dreskari looked away. 5 days, maybe 6. David sat back on his heels. 5 or 6 days without food. No wonder they look so thin. Wait here. He returned to his house again and raided his refrigerator. He came back with leftover chicken, some beef jerky, and bottles of water. He set them down between himself and the young Dreskari. The larger one stared at the food like it might be a trap. David opened one of the water bottles and took a drink himself, then offered it. "It is safe, just water." Permission granted, the 2 dragons fell on the food with desperate hunger. David watched them eat and felt something shift inside his chest. Something he had not felt in a long time. Purpose, maybe, or just the simple satisfaction of helping someone who needed it. When they finished eating, the smaller one was already breathing easier. The larger one looked at David with less fear and more confusion. "Why help us?" it asked. David stood up and brushed off his knees. "Because you are kids and you are hurt. That is enough reason." He left them with the remaining food and water. As he walked back to his house in the pre-dawn darkness, David wondered what exactly he had just gotten himself into. He should report them, he knew that. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see were those frightened amber eyes and the desperate hunger with which they had eaten. In the morning, he would figure out what to do. Tonight, he had made a choice. Right or wrong, the choice was made. 3 days passed like a strange dream. David found himself living 2 lives. During the day, he worked on aircraft restoration. In the front section of his hangar, greeting the occasional customer or delivery driver with his usual gruff nods. At night, he became someone else entirely, a caretaker, a protector, a smuggler of food and medical supplies. The small dragon, whose name he learned was Finn, improved rapidly. The infection responded to the antibiotics, and the torn wing began to show signs of healing. The larger one introduced herself as Sira. She spoke better Galactic Common than David had initially thought. Though her vocabulary had obvious gaps, on the 4th evening, David brought them a portable heater, extra blankets, and a box of old books from his house. Sira watched him set up the heater with cautious gratitude. "You risk much," she said. "Why continue?" David shrugged. "You need help. I can give it. Not complicated." Others would not agree. "The news says we are criminals." She was right about that. David had been watching the broadcasts. The Galactic Council was cracking down on unauthorized refugees, deportation, detention, rewards for information. The whole system seemed designed to hunt down people like Sira and Finn. Finn was examining one of the books David had brought. It was a picture book about airplanes. The young dragon traced his claw over the images with fascination. "He likes flying things," Sira explained. "Before the war, he would watch ships take off from our city. He wanted to be a pilot. What happened?" David asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Sira was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was flat, empty of emotion. "The hegemony came 6 months ago. They said we attacked their colony ships. We did not. But they came anyway. Big ships, many soldiers." David had heard this story before in different forms from different people. He had seen it during his own service. Powerful nations always had excuses for what they did to weaker ones. "Our parents hid us," Sarah continued, "put us on a smuggler ship. We heard the explosions when the ship launched. Our whole district was burning." Finn made a small sound and pressed closer to his sister. Sira wrapped a protective wing around him. "The smuggler brought us here. To Earth? But when your authority started searching cargo ships, he left us. We have been alone for 3 weeks. Hiding, hungry. David felt anger rising in his chest. Not at Sierra and Finn, at the whole rotten situation. At the smuggler who abandoned children, at the hegemony for starting the war, at himself for not doing more. You are not alone anymore, he said. Over the following days, David established a routine. He brought his old tablet loaded with children's movies and educational programs. Sierra proved to be remarkably intelligent. She absorbed English at an incredible rate, switching from broken common to simple English sentences within a week. Finn was different, more reserved, more damaged, but he came alive around machines. David started letting him watch when he worked on the planes. The young dragon asked questions in his own clicking language, which Sierra translated. Questions about engines and wing designs and fuel systems. One evening, Finn sneezed while David was explaining how a carburetor worked. A small jet of flame shot from his nostrils and singed the workbench. David jumped back in surprise. Finn immediately curled into a ball, trembling. Sorry. Sierra said quickly, moving between David and her brother. He cannot control it yet. Young Dreskari have accidents. Please do not be angry. David looked at the small scorch mark on his workbench, then at the terrified young dragon. He laughed. Actually laughed. It felt strange. He had not laughed in months. It is fine, David said, waving his hand dismissively. Just fire. I have an extinguisher right there, no problem. Sierra stared at him like he had grown a second head. You are not afraid? We were taught that humans fear our fire. That you would hate us for it. Who taught you that? Everyone, our teachers. The hegemony propaganda. Even the smuggler said it. David knelt down so he was at eye level with Finn, who was still curled up tight. Hey, look at me. The young dragon peeked out from behind his wings. Fire is just fire. I have seen much scarier things than a sneeze. You are fine. Something changed in that moment. David could see it in Sierra's eyes. The last wall of distrust crumbled. That night, for the first time, she allowed herself to sleep while David was still in the hangar. 2 months passed. The hangar became a home. David installed a partition wall to create a private space for Sierra and Finn. He brought more books, more movies, more food. He taught them about Earth history and human customs. They taught him about Dreskari culture, their meditation practices involving controlled breathing of flame, and the proper way to groom scales. David found himself looking forward to evenings in the hangar. Finn would help him with repairs, learning tool names and mechanical principles with enthusiasm that reminded David of his own younger self. Sierra studied everything she could find. About human law and politics, always preparing, always thinking ahead. The young dragons grew stronger. Their scales regained their natural iridescence, shifting colors in the light. Blue and silver for Sierra, bronze and green for Finn. They laughed now. They played. They felt safe. David's life changed too. The chronic pain that had plagued him seemed less important. The nightmares from his service days came less frequently. He had a reason to get up in the morning beyond just existing. One afternoon, his old military buddy Russell called to say he was in the area and wanted to visit. David felt his stomach drop. Sure, he said, trying to sound casual. When? Tomorrow afternoon work for you? David had no choice but to agree. He spent the next 12 hours hiding every trace of Sierra and Finn, blankets, books, food bowls, everything went into sealed storage containers. The dragons themselves squeezed into the cramped crawl space beneath the hangar. Russell arrived at 3 in the afternoon. He was a big man with an easy smile and sharp eyes that missed nothing. They talked about old times, about mutual friends, about nothing important. David felt like he was walking on a tightrope. Then Finn sneezed in the crawlspace. The sound echoed up through the floorboards. A muffled roar that definitely did not sound like any normal animal. Russell paused mid-sentence. What was that? David forced a laugh. Oh, that I got an iguana. Exotic pet thing, big guy. Makes weird noises. An iguana. Yeah, probably thinks he is a dinosaur or something. Russell gave him a long look but did not push it. They talked for another hour, but the easy atmosphere was gone. When Russell finally left, he paused at his truck. David, if you need help with anything, you know I am here, right? I know. Thanks. After Russell drove away, David let Sarah and Finn out of their hiding spot. They were cramped and scared. Finn was shaking. David sat down hard on his workbench stool. His hands were trembling too. That had been too close. Way too close. Sarah sat beside him, her scaled hand resting gently on his shoulder. We bring danger to you. No, David said firmly. You bring me purpose, big difference. That evening they sat together in their makeshift living space. Finn fell asleep curled against David's side, still exhausted from hours of hiding. Sarah watched the news on the tablet, her face troubled. They are making new laws, she said quietly. Stricter deportation rules? More rewards for reports? David looked down at Finn, sleeping peacefully for the first time in hours. Then at Sarah, who had become like a daughter to him. Not by blood, but by choice. By shared meals and late-night conversations and the simple act of caring. We cannot hide forever, Sarah said. I know, David took a deep breath. I know someone, a lawyer. Patricia Young, she handled some cases for veterans. She might help. That is dangerous for you. Yeah, well, most things worth doing are. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that still amazed David every time. You are strange for a human. I will take that as a compliment. Outside, the Texas sun set behind the hills. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, they were together. They were safe. And that was enough. Patricia Young had seen a lot during her 20 years as a civil rights attorney. She had defended refugees from a dozen different conflicts, fought deportation cases that seemed impossible, and won more than she lost. But when David Reed walked into her downtown Austin office with his incredible story, even she needed a moment to process. Let me make sure I understand, Patricia said slowly, setting down her coffee cup. You have been hiding 2 Dreskari refugees in your hangar for 3 months. Yes, 2 juvenile Dreskari who entered the country illegally as stowaways. They did not have much choice in the matter. And you want me to help you file for legal asylum. David met her eyes steadily. I want you to help me keep them safe. However that needs to happen. Patricia leaned back in her chair. She had known David since his discharge from the service. He had been one of the veterans she helped with benefits claims. A good man, quiet, honest, not someone who made rash decisions. David, do you understand what you are asking? The current political climate is hostile to any refugee claims, especially from the contested rim. The hegemony has significant influence with the Galactic Council. I know. If we file for asylum and lose, they will be deported immediately. Probably to hegemony custody. And if we do nothing, they live in hiding forever. That is not living. Patricia studied him for a long moment. She saw the determination in his eyes. This was not a man looking for an easy way out. This was a man who had already decided what was right and was prepared to fight for it. I will need to meet them, she said finally. That evening, Patricia followed David to his property. She had prepared herself for many things, but seeing 2 young Dreskari in person still took her breath away. Sarah was tall for her age, with scales that shimmered blue and silver in the light. Finn was smaller, bronze and green, with eyes that watched everything. You are the lawyer, Sarah said in careful English. Her accent was thick, but her grammar was nearly perfect. I am. You must be Sarah. Yes, this is Finn, my brother. Finn gave a small wave but did not speak. Patricia noticed how he positioned himself close to David. Seeking security. Over the next 2 hours, Patricia asked questions. She recorded testimony. She took photographs of old injuries and documented medical treatment. Sarah answered everything with painful honesty. The destruction of their home district. The death of their parents. The weeks of starvation on Earth before David found them. The hegemony claims your people attacked first, Patricia said. They have presented evidence to the council. Recordings of Dreskari ships firing on colony vessels. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. Lies. We had no weapons capable of harming their ships. Our world was peaceful. We traded food and art. We did not want war. Can you prove that? I am a child. I have no proof except my eyes and my memory. Is that not enough? Patricia wished it was. She really did. In court, we will need more, but I will find it. If evidence exists, I will dig it up. She spent the next 3 weeks doing exactly that. She contacted other civil rights organizations. She reached out to independent journalists who had covered the Dreskari conflict. She found refugee advocacy groups operating quietly across Earth, where she discovered made her blood run cold. The hegemony had not just invaded the Dreskari homeworld. They had systematically targeted civilian centers. They had bombed schools and hospitals. They had rounded up survivors and shipped them to unknown facilities. And the Dreskari who escaped were being hunted across the galaxy, but more than that, Patricia found hints of something darker. Reports from other species about hegemony research programs. Whispers about biological experimentation, nothing concrete. Nothing she could use in court yet, but enough to make her very, very worried. She filed the asylum petition on a cold Monday morning. By noon, the news had leaked. By evening, it was everywhere. David's property was surrounded by news vehicles and protesters by the next morning. Some people held signs supporting the young Dreskari. Others demanded their immediate deportation. The whole situation balanced on a knife's edge. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, the fastest Patricia had ever seen a case move through the system, which told her that powerful people wanted this resolved quickly. On the day of the hearing, David wore his old service uniform. It still fit, though it felt strange after years of civilian clothes. Sierra and Finn wore simple clothing that Patricia had purchased for them. Finn held David's hand so tightly that his claws left marks. The courtroom was packed. Patricia could see hegemony representatives in the gallery, their faces showing smug confidence. She could see human isolationist groups, faces twisted with anger. She could also see supporters, veterans who knew David, refugee advocates, people who believed in doing the right thing. Judge Helen Rodriguez presided. She was known for being tough but fair. Patricia hoped that would be enough. The prosecution went first. They argued that Sierra and Finn had entered Earth illegally, that allowing them to stay would set a dangerous precedent, that the hegemony had legitimate claims to all Dreskari citizens as part of their occupation authority. Then it was Patricia's turn. She presented evidence of the systematic destruction of civilian targets. She showed medical records of the injuries Sierra and Finn had sustained. She called character witnesses who spoke about David's integrity and the transformation they had seen in the young Dreskari. Finally, she called Sierra to testify. The young dragon took the stand with visible nervousness. Her translator helped with the technical legal terms, but she spoke mostly in English now. "Tell the court what happened the day you left your homeworld," Patricia said gently. Sierra took a breath. Then she began to speak. She described the sounds of explosions, the smell of burning buildings, her mother pushing her and Finn into a cargo container, tears streaming down her face, her father standing guard at the door, knowing he would not survive. "She told us to be brave," Sierra said, her voice breaking. "She said humans would help us, that Earth was a good place." I did not believe her. "I thought all aliens hated Dreskari. What changed your mind?" Patricia asked. Sierra looked directly at David. "He did. David could have reported us, could have let Finn die from infection, could have sent us away. He chose to help instead. He chose to see us as children who needed protection, not as problems to be solved." "Objection," the hegemony lawyer stood. "This is emotional manipulation, not relevant testimony." Judge Rodriguez looked at the lawyer with cold eyes. "Overruled. The character of the sponsor is absolutely relevant to asylum cases. Continue." Patricia smiled. "Sierra, what do you want?" "I want to live. I want my brother to live. I want to go to school and learn and maybe someday help other Dreskari who are running and scared. I want a future." She paused. "David gave us that chance. We just want to keep it." The hegemony presented their counter-evidence. Recordings that supposedly showed Dreskari aggression, statistics about crime rates among refugee populations, arguments about sovereignty and jurisdiction. Patricia countered with more evidence. reports from neutral observers, testimonies from other Dreskari refugees via protected video links, scientific studies showing that Dreskari were no more dangerous than humans. Back and forth it went for hours. Finn sat silent in the gallery, his face pale. David sat rigid, every muscle tense. Finally, Judge Rodriguez called for a recess. I need time to review all evidence and testimony. This court will reconvene in 1 week for my decision. 1 week. 7 days of waiting. 7 days of uncertainty. The Galactic Council made its position clear during that week. A formal statement declared that Earth should comply with hegemony jurisdiction claims. Pressure mounted from diplomatic channels. Political commentators argued both sides on every news program. Then came the worst part. On day 5 of the waiting period, official orders arrived. Sierra and Finn were to be placed in Galactic Council custody pending the final decision. Protective custody, they called it. But Patricia knew what it really was: leverage, control, a way to ensure compliance. The enforcement agents arrived at David's property the next morning. They were polite but firm. They had legal authority. There was nothing David could do. Sierra did not fight. She held Finn's hand and walked calmly to the transport vehicle. But as she passed David, she whispered something in Dreskari. David did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Trust me. Keep fighting. The vehicle drove away. David stood in his empty hangar and felt the weight of every decision he had made crushing down on him. Patricia put a hand on his shoulder. We are not done yet, she said, by watching them disappear down his driveway. David wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. If trying to do the right thing had just led those kids into something far worse. He found one of Finn's drawings later that evening. A picture of the 3 of them standing in front of the hangar. Crude lines and simple shapes. But the meaning was clear. Family. David taped it to his refrigerator and made himself a promise. Whatever happened next, he would not let them down. The Galactic Council detention facility looked clean and professional from the outside. White walls. Security checkpoints. Official bureaucrats in neat uniforms. David visited every day during the permitted hours. Every day he watched Sierra and Finn become smaller versions of themselves. The first visit had been the hardest. Sierra tried to be brave, speaking calmly through the transparent barrier. But David could see the fear in her eyes. Finn would not speak at all. He just pressed his small hand against the barrier, and David matched it from his side, wishing he could do more. By the second week, the changes were obvious. Finn had stopped eating properly. Sierra's scales were losing their luster. They were regressing, becoming the frightened refugees David had first found in his hangar. All the progress, all the healing, was unraveling. They wake up screaming, Sierra told him during one visit. Her English was still good, but her voice was flat, dead. Finn thinks we are back on the smuggler ship. Sometimes I think so too. Patricia is working on it, David said, trying to sound hopeful. The judge will make her decision soon. Will it matter? The hegemony has already decided our fate. David had no answer for that. Patricia was indeed working. She was digging deeper into the hegemony's background than anyone had before. What she found made her call an emergency meeting with David at a secure location. They met in a parking garage at midnight. Patricia looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes. I found something, she said without preamble. Something big. The hegemony's invasion of the Dreskari homeworld was not about territory or resources. Then what? Biology. The Dreskari have unique regenerative capabilities. Their bodies can heal from injuries that would kill most species. Their mental resilience is extraordinary. The hegemony wants to study them, harvest them, use them to enhance their own soldiers. David felt cold spread through his chest. You can prove this? I have testimony from 3 other species who experienced similar programs. I have financial records showing funding for biological research facilities. I have satellite images of construction on worlds where Dreskari refugees disappeared. But I do not have smoking gun evidence. Not yet. What do we need? Someone on the inside. Someone willing to testify directly about what the hegemony is doing. Patricia paused. David, there is more. I checked the facility where Sarah and Finn are being held. They have been taking regular tissue samples from both of them. For medical evaluation, they claim. David's hands clenched into fists. They are already studying them. I think so. And if the asylum claim is denied, they will be transported to hegemony custody within 48 hours. That night, David received an anonymous message on his personal device. No sender information. Just text. If you want them to survive, withdraw the asylum case. This is your only warning. He showed it to Patricia the next day. She was not surprised. They are getting nervous. That means we are getting close to something they want hidden. But close was not enough. 2 days later, David's hangar was vandalized. Paint sprayed across the walls. Anti-alien slogans, threats, the local police investigated, but found nothing useful. Russell showed up the next morning with supplies to help clean up. He worked in silence for a while, then spoke quietly. I know what you are hiding. Have known for months? David stopped scrubbing. Russell, I can explain. Do not bother. I ran those amber eyes through some databases. Matched the timeline. Figured it out. Russell continued cleaning. Question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? They are in custody. The whole system is against us. Russell set down his brush. I have been tracking some vehicles near your property. High-end surveillance gear. Not local police. Not even federal. Galactic Council contractors, if I had to guess. They are watching you. Probably listening too. So? So when they move Sierra and Finn, they will not be expecting trouble from a washed-up veteran and his paranoid buddy. Russell smiled grimly. Unless that veteran has friends who remember what it means to protect people. David stared at his old friend. You are talking about extraction. That is illegal. If we are caught, yeah, big consequences. Prison probably. Galactic sanctions definitely. Russell shrugged. But you did not find those kids and spend months caring for them just to watch them get shipped off to some hegemony research lab. I know you, David. You are already planning something stupid. He was right. David had been thinking about it for days. Thinking about those frightened amber eyes, about Finn's silence, about Sarah's fading hope, about everything they had survived just to end up as test subjects in some nightmare facility. If we do this, there is no going back, David said slowly. I know. I'm in anyway. They spent the next 3 days planning. Russell called in favors from old military contacts. People who owed him. People who understood what it meant to protect the innocent. Patricia stayed carefully distant from the planning, maintaining plausible deniability while feeding them critical information about transport schedules and security protocols. The transfer was scheduled for Thursday morning. A medical transport vehicle would move Sierra and Finn to a secure spaceport for deportation processing. Standard route along. Highway 290, minimal security, because who would be crazy enough to interfere with a Galactic Council operation? David and Russell, apparently, they intercepted the vehicle on a remote stretch of highway at dawn. Russell's team blocked the road with their trucks. David approached the transport vehicle with his hands visible. The guards were professionals, but they were not prepared for determined humans with military training. No shots were fired. No one was seriously hurt. The guards were secured with zip ties and left with communication devices. David opened the back of the transport. Sierra and Finn stared at him from inside, confusion and hope warring on their faces. Time to go, David said simply. This is illegal, Sierra said, even as she helped Finn out of the vehicle. Yeah, so is kidnapping children for medical experiments. Guess we are all criminals now. They drove north in Russell's truck, away from the spaceport, away from the authorities who would be mobilizing within minutes. Finn curled up against David in the back seat, trembling but silent. Sierra kept looking back, as if expecting pursuit at any moment. Russell's mountain cabin was 3 hours away, remote, defensible, stocked with supplies. They could hide there while Patricia continued the legal battle from a distance. The news broke before they reached the cabin. Veteran kidnaps alien refugees from legal custody? The feeds were already spinning the story. Domestic terrorist? Extremist? Dangerous radical? Patricia called on a secure line. David, they are going to hunt you. Federal authorities? Galactic enforcement, everyone. I know. Was it worth it? David looked at Finn, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. At Sierra, who was looking at him with something like wonder. Yeah, he said. It was... At the cabin, Russell set up perimeter sensors while David got Sarah and Finn settled inside. The place was rustic but comfortable. Better than a detention cell by miles. That evening, they sat around the fireplace. Finn was more alert now, asking quiet questions about what would happen next. Sarah was processing everything, her quick mind already working through scenarios. You gave up everything for us, she said to David. Your home? Your freedom. Your life. No, David corrected gently. I traded one life for a better one. Not the same thing. Russell came in from checking the perimeter. News is saying Patricia just released a ton of evidence to the media. Documentation about hegemony research programs. Testimony from other species. It is going viral. David pulled up the news feeds on his tablet. Patricia had done it. She had released everything she found, damn the consequences. The story was spreading across human networks. Independent journalists were picking it up. Questions were being asked. Public opinion is shifting, Russell observed. Not fast, but moving. People do not like the idea of kids being used for experiments. Sierra watched the news coverage with intense focus. This could work. If enough people care, if enough pressure builds, the council will have to investigate. Maybe, David said. But it will take time. And we are officially fugitives now. Finn looked up at him with those amber eyes. Guardian kept his promise. Kept us safe. David felt something break and reform inside his chest. Guardian, Finn had called him that before, but now it felt different. More real, more permanent. Yeah, kid. I did. Outside, the sun set over the mountains. Inside, a makeshift family tried to figure out their next move. The fight was far from over. But for tonight, they were together. They were safe. And sometimes that had to be enough. 1 week in the mountains changed everything and nothing. The cabin was safe but felt like a cage. David taught Sarah and Finn basic wilderness skills, showing them which plants were edible and how to read weather patterns. Finn loved it, exploring the forest with careful enthusiasm. Sarah remained vigilant, always watching for threats. Russell handled security and supply runs. He traveled into town for groceries and news, always careful, always alert. Each time he returned, the news got stranger. Patricia's evidence is spreading, Russell reported on day 5. Major human news networks are running stories. Independent investigators are digging into hegemony facilities. There are protests outside Galactic Council buildings. What about the authorities? David asked. Still looking for you? But the manhunt is getting complicated. Too many people asking questions about why a veteran would risk everything for 2 refugee kids. David watched Sierra and Finn through the cabin window. They were practicing controlled fire breathing, a meditative technique Sierra was teaching her brother. Small, precise flames that hurt no one. Beautiful and controlled. They are good kids, Russell said quietly. Worth the trouble. Yeah, they are. On day 8, Patricia made contact through encrypted channels. Her voice was tense. David, we have a problem. The Galactic Council is pushing hard for your arrest. But that is not the real issue. I have been getting reports from my refugee network. Other Dreskarian hiding across Earth, they are scared. Scared of what? Scared of being next. Scared of what your actions mean for them. Some think you are a hero. Others think you just made everything worse by breaking the law. Patricia paused. But there is something else. A group of Dreskari survivors wants to meet with you. Elders who have been coordinating refugee communities in secret. How many Dreskari are on Earth? More than anyone realized. Maybe 200 or 300? They have been hiding in plain sight, using forged documents, staying under the radar. They want to help. 2 days later, a vehicle arrived at the cabin. Russell met it with weapons ready, but the visitors came in peace. 3 adult Dreskari, their scales showing the silver streaks of age and experience. The lead elder introduced himself as Kale. "You protected 2 of our young," Kale said in perfect English. "This is a debt we do not take lightly." David was not sure what to say. "I did what anyone should do, but most do not." Kale studied him with ancient eyes. "We have been watching your situation. We have resources. Safe houses across North America. Communities that can hide Syrah and Finn better than this cabin. Why stay hidden?" David asked. "If there are hundreds of you, you could demand recognition. Rights, and risk deportation for all? The young ones especially would suffer." Kale looked toward the cabin where Syrah and Finn were watching cautiously from the window. "But perhaps your actions have created opportunity. Patricia's evidence is forcing questions. If enough pressure builds, perhaps change becomes possible." "What are you suggesting?" "A choice. We can take Syrah and Finn into our community. Hide them properly. Give them a life among their own people." Kale paused. "Or you can continue fighting publicly. Risk everything for a legal precedent that might help all of us." David felt torn. Safety for Syrah and Finn versus the chance to change things for all Dreskari refugees. There was no easy answer. That evening he discussed it with Sarah. She listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "What do you want?" David asked. "I want Finn to be safe. But I also want him to have a future. A real one. Not hiding forever." Syrah met his eyes. "I think we should fight. But together. Not you taking all the risk. You are kids. This should not be your burden. We stopped being children when our parents died. We survived smuggler ships and starvation and detention. We can handle this fight." She was right, David realized. Syrah had grown up fast, too fast, but she had grown strong in the process. Treating her like a helpless child would be an insult to everything she had survived. "Okay," he said. "We fight together." Patricia negotiated the terms. David would agree to a public hearing if certain conditions were met. Full media access. Independent observers. And most importantly, a promise that Syrah and Finn would not be separated from David. Regardless of the outcome, the Galactic Council refused initially. But the public pressure was building. The evidence Patricia released had sparked investigations across multiple worlds. The hegemony was facing scrutiny it had never experienced before. They needed to resolve the David Reed situation before it became an even bigger problem. Finally, a deal was reached. David would turn himself in. A new hearing would be held with expanded evidence. And critically, the testimony of other Dreskari survivors would be permitted. "This is risky," Russell warned. "They could be setting a trap?" "Probably are," David agreed. "But staying hidden is not sustainable. Either we fight now or we run forever." The return to civilization was surreal. David drove down from the mountains with Syrah and Finn, followed by Russell and a convoy of support vehicles organized by refugee advocates. Media helicopters tracked them from above. Protesters lined the roads, both supporters and opponents. The courthouse was packed. David, Syrah, and Finn entered together, flanked by Patricia and Russell. Security was heavy. Tension was thick enough to cut. Judge Rodriguez looked exhausted. This case had clearly taken its toll on her as well. The expanded hearing lasted 3 days. Patricia presented her evidence about hegemony research programs. Kale and other Dreskari elders testified about their experiences as refugees, about the communities they had built in secret, about the constant fear of discovery and deportation. Other species representatives spoke via video link, describing similar hegemony programs targeting their people. Scientific experts explained Dreskari biology without reducing them to medical specimens. Human refugee advocates drew parallels to Earth's own history of persecution and survival. The hegemony representatives fought back hard. They presented counter-evidence, legal arguments, jurisdictional claims. They argued that David had committed serious crimes that could not be overlooked regardless of his motivations. On the third day, Finn testified. He had refused to speak during the original hearing, but now he stood before the court with quiet determination. His English was better than it had been, though he still struggled with complex words. "I was dying when David found us," Finn said simply. "Infection, starvation, fear, he could have reported us. He chose to save us instead. He chose to see us as people, not as problems." The hegemony lawyer objected. "This is emotional manipulation." Judge Rodriguez looked at the lawyer with cold steel in her eyes. "This is a child describing his lived experience, overruled." Finn continued. "In Dreskari culture we have a word, guardian. It means someone who protects not because they must, but because they choose to. Someone who sees another's pain and decides to bear some of that weight. David is guardian. To me. To Sierra, to the idea that different species can care for each other." When Finn finished, there was not a dry eye in the courtroom. Even some of the hegemony representatives looked uncomfortable. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. Patricia stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, this case is not really about David Reed's actions, though they were both illegal and heroic. This case is about what kind of world we want to live in. Do we want a world where children fleeing genocide are treated as criminals? Where showing compassion becomes a crime? Where power determines justice?" She paused. "Or do we want a world where protecting the vulnerable is celebrated? Where laws serve justice rather than convenience? Where humanity means something more than just our species designation?" The hegemony layer gave his closing. "Laws exist for a reason. Borders mean something. Sovereignty matters. If every individual could decide which laws to follow based on personal feelings, society would collapse. David Reed is not a hero. He is a criminal who endangered galactic relations for his own emotional satisfaction." Judge Rodriguez called for a recess. "I will announce my decision tomorrow morning." That night, David sat with Sarah and Finn in a secured hotel room, surrounded by guards and supporters. None of them slept well. Too much riding on one person's decision. Too many lives hanging in the balance. Russell brought coffee in the morning. "Whatever happens, we have backup plans. Ways to get you all out if things go bad." David appreciated the thought, but knew running was no longer an option. They had committed to this path. Now they would see it through, the courthouse filled before dawn. People had camped outside overnight, waiting for seats in the gallery. Human supporters held signs reading, "Protect refugee children," and "David Reed is a hero." Counter-protesters waved flags demanding, "Enforce our laws and Earth for humans." The whole planet seemed to be holding its breath. David sat between Sierra and Finn at the defendant's table. Patricia shuffled papers nervously. Russell sat directly behind them. A solid presence in uncertain times. Judge Rodriguez entered at precisely 9 in the morning. Everyone rose? The judge's face was unreadable. "This has been one of the most difficult cases of my career," she began. "The law is clear in some respects. David Reed did violate multiple statutes regarding refugee custody and interfering with Galactic Council operations. These are serious charges with serious consequences." David felt Sierra's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently. "However," Judge Rodriguez continued, "the law must also serve justice. And justice requires us to examine not just actions, but context. Not just rules, but reasons." She looked directly at David. "You saw children in desperate need and you helped them. You broke laws, yes, but you did so in service of a higher moral imperative." The hegemony lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I have reviewed all evidence regarding hegemony activities. While I cannot make determinations about their larger policies, I find sufficient credible testimony to believe that deporting these specific refugees would place them in imminent danger. Therefore, I am granting political asylum to Sierra and Finn under humanitarian exception protocols." The courtroom erupted. Cheers from supporters. Angry shouts from opponents. The judge's gavel cracked down repeatedly. Order! I am not finished. Silence gradually returned. Judge Rodriguez looked at David again. As for your criminal charges, I am suspending all sentences pending completion of community service and continued guardian responsibilities. You will be monitored. You will comply with all reporting requirements, but I am not sending you to prison for saving lives. More chaos in the courtroom. The judge allowed it this time. David sat frozen, barely believing what he had heard. Sierra was crying openly. Finn made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Patricia leaned over. We won. David, we actually won. But Judge Rodriguez was not done. She called for order once more. Furthermore, I am recommending that Earth's government establish formal refugee protection protocols for Dreskari and other species fleeing proven persecution. I am also requesting that the United Nations investigate the allegations regarding hegemony research facilities. This case has revealed systematic failures in our current system. Those failures must be addressed. The hegemony representatives stormed out of the courtroom, their faces tight with fury. Let them be angry, David thought. Sierra and Finn were safe. That was what mattered. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed them. Patricia handled most of the questions while David kept Sierra and Finn close. Russell and other supporters formed a protective barrier. How do you feel about the verdict? A reporter shouted. David looked down at Sierra and Finn, both exhausted but smiling. I feel like justice won today. Finally, what will you do now? Go home, be a family, live our lives. The drive back to David's property took hours through celebratory crowds. When they finally arrived, neighbors had decorated the entrance with welcome signs. Someone had repaired the vandalized hangar and painted it fresh white. That evening, David stood in the hangar with Sierra and Finn, the space that had been their hiding place, their home, their sanctuary. So much had changed since that night 3 months ago when he found 2 starving refugees behind his storage crates. What happens now? Sierra asked. She was always planning ahead, always thinking. Now we figure out normal life, David said. School for you too. Work for me. Maybe some therapy for all of us. Normal, Finn repeated, tasting the word. I like normal. Over the following weeks, normal began to take shape. Patricia helped process the formal adoption papers. David became the legal guardian of 2 Dreskari children, the first human to do so. Local schools created accommodations for non-human students. It was messy and imperfect, but it was progress. The broader impact rippled outward. Earth's government established refugee protection programs. Other Dreskari families began emerging from hiding, seeking legal status. The United Nations launched investigations into hegemony facilities. Other planets started following Earth's example. The hegemony fought back through diplomatic channels. But the damage was done. Questions had been asked that could not be unasked. Evidence had been revealed that could not be hidden. Their power was not broken, but it was challenged in ways it had not been before. Kale and the Dreskari elders visited several times. They were building a cultural center in Austin, a place where refugee families could gather and maintain their heritage while building new lives on Earth. You started something important, Kale told David during one visit. One man choosing compassion over convenience. One family refusing to accept injustice. It rippled outward. I just helped some kids, David protested. Yes, and in doing so, you reminded everyone that laws should serve people, not the other way around. That is a powerful reminder. 6 months after the verdict, Sierra and Finn attended their first day of public school. David drove them there in his truck, all 3 nervous for different reasons. Other students stared, but there were also smiles. Curiosity rather than hostility. Remember what we practiced, David said as they prepared to go inside. If anyone gives you trouble, find a teacher. Do not handle it yourself. We know, Guardian, Sierra said, using the Dreskari term that had become his title in their little family. Love you both, David said. Love you too, they responded in unison before heading into the building. David watched them go, his heart full of pride and fear and hope. They would face challenges. Prejudice still existed. The hegemony had not given up. Life would not suddenly become easy, but they would face it together. As a family. Russell met David for coffee that afternoon. His old friend looked relaxed in a way he had not in months. Patricia called. She is getting requests from all over. Other species with refugee crises. People wanting advice on challenging deportations. She's thinking about starting an organization specifically for interspecies refugee advocacy. She would be good at that, David said. She wants to name it after you. The Reed Foundation for Refugee Justice. Absolutely not. Name it after Sierra and Finn if you want to name it after anyone. They are the ones who survived. I just helped. Russell smiled. Still humble after everything? Not humble. Just honest. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching people go about their daily lives. A Drescari family walked past the coffee shop window, children laughing as they played. A year ago, that would have been impossible. Now it was becoming normal. Do you ever regret it? Russell asked. All the risks you took? David thought about his old life. Quiet, safe, lonely. He thought about his new life. Complicated, risky, full. Not even for a second. That evening, the family gathered for dinner at David's house. Sierra had cooked using a traditional Drescari recipe adapted for Earth ingredients. Finn set the table with careful precision. David opened windows to let out the smoke from Sierra's controlled flame cooking. They ate together, talking about their days. Sierra described her history class, excited about learning Earth's past conflicts and resolutions. Finn demonstrated a science experiment his teacher had shown him. David shared plans for a new aircraft restoration project, normal domestic conversation. Simple moments. The kind of life that had seemed impossible just months ago. After dinner, they sat in the living room. Finn practiced reading while Sierra worked on homework. David reviewed bills and paperwork. An ordinary evening for an extraordinary family. Before bed, Finn approached David with something in his hands. A drawing more refined than his early attempts. It showed 3 figures standing together under a night sky full of stars. 1 human. 2 Drescari, family. For you, Finn said. So you remember what? That you saved us. That you chose to see us as people. That you are a guardian. Finn paused, choosing his words carefully. That humans can be good. David felt tears sting his eyes. He pulled Finn into a hug, this child who had been starving and terrified and now was safe and loved. You saved me too, David said quietly. Both of you. I was just existing before. Now I am living. Sierra joined the hug, wrapping her wings around both of them. A strange sight, maybe 1 human and 2 dragons tangled together in a living room in Texas, but it was real. It was true. It was home. Later, after Sierra and Finn were asleep in their rooms, David stood in his backyard looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, other refugees were running. Other families were being torn apart. Other children were afraid and alone. He could not save them all. 1 person could not fix a broken galaxy. But he had saved 2. He had stood up when it would have been easier to look away. He had chosen compassion over convenience, justice over law, love over fear, and maybe, just maybe, that choice had inspired others to make similar choices. To see past differences. To protect the vulnerable. To be better than the worst versions of themselves. That was humanity's real strength, David realized. Not technology or warfare or diplomatic power. It was the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to care. Of seeing another's pain and deciding to help carry some of that weight. Of building bridges instead of walls. 1 choice. 1 moment of compassion. 1 family, ripples spreading outward, inside the house. Sierra and Finn slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that they were wanted and protected and loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be setbacks and struggles and moments of doubt, but tonight, they were home. And sometimes that was everything.